In this episode, one of the deadliest shark attack sprees in the world was about to take place off the coast of South Africa. Within a few days of each other, two swimmers would be brutally attacked by a man-eating shark, starting what would later be known as Black December. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. These are the terrifying shark attacks of Robert Worley and Alan Greene, the first two victims of Black December. Welcome to Final Affliction. In December 1957, and the months that followed, a series of devastating shark attacks plagued South Africa's east coast. A combination of factors enticed greater number of sharks to the area. There were whaling ships operating just offshore. Exceptionally high tides had flooded rivers, washing livestock from surrounding farmland into the water. Huge volumes of river water flowed into the sea, churning up the seabed, increasing turbidity and reducing underwater visibility. On top of those conditions, coastal resorts had developed in South Africa, drawing hundreds of visitors into the sea. It was a perfect storm. On Wednesday, 18th December 1957, 16-year-old Robert Worley headed down to the water on Durban's coast in South Africa. He arrived at the beach at Greene, 37 kilometers south of the busy port of Durban, with his two friends, Tony Duffy and Brian Dobson. The boys were no stranger to the water. Robert was an amateur lifesaver at Isipingo, a beach a few miles north. They grabbed their bodyboards and joined the other surfers and bathers in the water. The conditions were perfect. The waves were a good size, the weather was warm, and the water was clear. They spent the morning riding the waves, enjoying the thrill of the surf. As morning came to an end, they swam out of the water and took a break. But the waves had been so good that they decided to head back in later in the afternoon. By now, the conditions had changed slightly. There was a change in the tide, and the water that flowed into the Pacific Ocean from the Msimbazi River mouth was turning the water cloudy. Even so, there were 50 or 60 bathers in the sea. Robert and Tony headed in once more. They paddled out past the swimmers, just beyond the breakers. He floated on his bodyboard, the furthest out from the beach. His legs dangled in the murky water. He looked out to sea, anticipating the waves as they grew and tumbled towards him. After 20 minutes, Robert felt something brush past his leg. He instinctively looked down and saw a large, dark shadow swim past him in the water. He didn't immediately think it was a shark, but when the shadow circled back around and came towards him, he knew he was in trouble. A moment later, as the shadow powered forwards, a dorsal fin sliced through the water, just 2 feet from where he floated. Then he felt it, the terrifying sensation of something sharp and powerful grabbing him by the left leg. It tugged him so hard that he was ripped from his bodyboard and pulled underwater. Below the surface, he was fighting for his life. He kicked furiously and tried to hit the shark on the face. Air escaped from his lungs, and a column of bubbles rose upwards. The shark shook him ferociously in its jaws. Its power was palpable. As Robert was thrashed from side to side, he could feel himself surge through the water as he was held tightly in the shark's lethal grip, being dragged down and further down. He looked up at the surface. Sunlight penetrated the water just feet above him. He cried out, but his screams were muted beneath the waves. Then, to his complete surprise, he was released, almost as quickly as he had been dragged underwater. He felt himself break free. He propelled himself upwards and broke through the surface, taking in gulps of air. He felt the warm air on his face as he anxiously looked around. Kicking at the water to stay afloat, Robert suddenly realized that he had lost his leg. The shark had severed it from the rest of his body. The release he felt earlier that allowed him to make a quick escape to the surface hadn't actually been the shark letting him go. It was his leg being ripped off that freed him. The shark crunched through his lower leg with such power that it severed his lower leg from his upper leg without Robert even noticing it was gone. Robert panicked at the surface and shouted to others who swam just yards away. At first, they thought that he was just messing around, but when his pleas became desperate, Leon Melherby, who was swimming close by, came to his rescue. Leon was on a camping holiday at the time and had decided to go for a swim that afternoon. As he rushed to the aid of the youngster, he was joined by another swimmer, who together pulled Robert to shore. It felt like an agonizingly slow swim to get to the safety of dry land. The shark could have been circling below them. The blood trail could have been enticing other sharks to the area. When they made it to shore, a qualified nurse rushed over to them and applied pressure to Robert's stump until emergency services arrived. Robert was rushed to the African Explosive Hospital in Umbagatwini, just 10 miles away. He remained conscious throughout the whole ordeal and was able to describe the attack in great detail. He had lost his leg below the knee. It had been bitten clean off by the shark, and now his thigh muscle was torn and shredded on his upper leg. Robert and the surgeons made the decision to amputate the upper leg as well, leaving him with just a short stump below his waist. Robert described being able to still feel his leg after he had lost it, a sensation known as the phantom limb syndrome. He could feel his toes itch, but couldn't relieve it because there were no toes to itch. He found these new sensations frustrating, but it was something that he was going to have to get used to as he adjusted to his new life without one leg. At first, Professor J.L.B. Smith identified the attacker as a ragged tooth shark, but this species doesn't have the strength needed to sever human bone. Only a shark having heavy serrated teeth could have inflicted the injury. It was later theorized that the most likely candidates for the attack are a tiger shark or a great white shark. Robert's attack was the first in a series of shark attacks that plagued the KwaZulu-Natal coastline in what became known as Black December. It was a terrifying time for visitors and locals alike, and tourists left in droves. Over the next 4 months, 9 people were attacked by sharks along the same stretch of coastline. 6 of them were fatal. The next attack to happen in the Natal waters took place just 2 days after Robert's attack and 60 miles south. Alan Greene was 15 years old. He had emigrated to South Africa from the U.S. He had grown up with his mother in America and now moved in with his father on the African continent. They lived in Johannesburg together, but over the festive season decided to head to the Durban coast for a 3-week holiday. On Friday, December 20th, 1957, Alan entered the water at Uvongo, where they were staying at the hotel. 80 miles away in Durban, lifesavers were battling with the sea conditions. The water was rough, and they were patrolling a stretch of beaches swarming with 25,000 visitors. After rescuing 9 people from drowning in the water, they closed the beaches for 2 hours until conditions improved. But further south at Uvongo, the sea was comparatively calm. Around 50 swimmers were in the water. It was a sheltered bay, almost completely closed off to the open sea. Conditions were calm and underwater visibility was relatively good where the bathers were. Alan swam across a deep channel to a sandbank. There, he climbed out of the water and watched as the meter-high waves crashed at his feet. Looking out to sea, Alan saw something floating in the water. It was the carcass of a sheep bobbing up and down in the surf, washed down the river by recent floods. The ocean was awash with vegetation and debris. The water was murky and discolored, a stark contrast to the sheltered patch of water where the beachgoers were swimming. Alan jumped back into the water, where he and his friend, John Digasili, splashed in the channel just 30 yards from the beach. As 20-year-old John caught a wave towards the shore, John's father suddenly spotted something that made him shout out to the 2 boys. "Shark!" he cried, as a fin sliced through the water just yards from the youngsters. John turned his head and spotted the tail fin of the shark heading towards Alan, who now stood in just 1 meter of water. The shark's head raised up out of the ocean. Its jaws were agape and its serrated teeth on display. It latched onto Alan, closing its enormous jaws around the 15-year-old's right arm and right side of his torso. Alan cried out as he felt the shark's powerful grip. The shark's teeth severed skin and muscle. Horrified onlookers watched as the shark pushed the boy along the surface of the water. Its tail thrashed wildly from side to side as it propelled itself and its victim through the shallow water on the far side of the channel. Swimmers immediately rushed to Alan's aid. They linked arms, forming a human chain across the water channel. The water had turned red around Alan as the commotion unfolded. After a few terrifying seconds, the shark released its grip, and Alan was grabbed by the other beachgoers. But the damage had already been done. He was passed along the chain of swimmers, his limp body unresponsive, his eyes closed. When he was pulled to shore, the severity of the attack became apparent. The shark had bitten into his arm and tore gaping holes from his abdomen and chest. Tragically, the youngster had died from blood loss before he even made it to the beach. There were dozens of witnesses for this brutal attack on Alan, but the species of shark is still unknown and was never verified. It's thought to be the work of a tiger shark, who is known to move into shallow water to hunt, especially around sandbars, where Alan was attacked. With 2 people attacked by a shark within days of each other, and one of those attacks being fatal, the local beachgoers and tourists alike were beginning to think a man-eating shark was lurking in the area. Little did they know, Alan wouldn't be the last fatality in the area. 7 more swimmers would be attacked in the coming months, and what would become one of the deadliest shark attack sprees in history. Alan was just the first unlucky swimmer to meet his terrifying final affliction.